Stellar Blade is what I have been forced to describe as an eclectic surprise, and if you're not familiar with what that word means, surprise means an unexpected event or thing. I'm just kidding. Eclectic basically means ideas, style, or taste from a broad or diverse range of sources, and that is certainly true of Stellar Blade. If you've played the Stellar Blade demo or you've watched any of my commentary on it, you might have expected an action JRPG inspired by, or maybe a game that sort of borrows from Sekiro with maybe just a sprinkle of a Souls-like. And while it certainly stays true to that, the game offers a wide variety of gameplay experiences that don't simply center around challenging enemies or bosses. From levels that strip away your sword and play a little bit more like Dead Space, to platforming, climbing, and puzzles that remind me a little bit of Tomb Raider, maybe even sections of The Last of Us. So I wanted to break this review, or sort of my first impressions, down into the good, the bad, and the eclectic. So let's just start with the good. The first thing worthy of praise in Stellar Blade is the graphics and the performance. Environments have colors that pop, and the great contrast of going inside and outside, I think, is a very, very good use of the graphics in the game. Enemies are also heavily detailed and fluid, and obviously Eve is at the center stage of a very clear focus on graphics and performance. Now, I have not noticed a single instance of stutters or frame drops, and the combat can be quite intense and very, very fast. You would notice if it was stuttering or you were getting frame drops, because it would make it very difficult to stay engaged in the combat and land those perfect parries and those perfect dodges. And while areas are contained some of the time, there are open areas like the Wildlands, and it just does not seem to struggle with maintaining solid performance. But I don't want to belabor the point on graphics, because it's obvious from trailers or gameplay uploads and even live streams. This is a very great looking game, and it runs very well. So the real heart of Stellar Blade, and the thing that is deserving of the most attention, is the combat. Now, I will make mention of some of the rough edges that still seem present when I discuss the bad aspects of this game, but overall, the combat continues to shine in this game beyond what I was able to experience in the demo. And the thing I really grew to appreciate in the full game was acquiring gear that made me pay more attention to what I was doing, because I was sort of piecing things together with more intentionality than I did in the demo. Currently, I have a build that makes my level 2 and my level 4 combos very strong, and I added something even recently that makes the final hit of a level 4 combo even stronger, and you can really notice that when you're able to use it. What this has made me do is I study each enemy and I find the best ways to stun them in order to use these combos, beyond just sort of leaning into my build for the perfect parries, the perfect dodges, and the blink. All of that, I think, feels very rewarding when you actually pull it off in the middle of a fight, and certain enemies become predictable in that regard. There are a handful of enemies I know right now I can trigger them to do a blinkable attack, and then I get right behind them and get to finish them off, and it's sort of a rehearsed thing, but it's satisfying every time. And mastering surprise executions is also very useful in navigating the open world. And the enemy variety certainly keeps you on your toes. I go from fighting enemies that look like walking guns, to grotesque-looking butchers, to human-like machine creatures. And with only 10 hours into the game, I know there's a great amount of variety beyond the first 3 areas that I've been in. I've tried to avoid spoilers, but I have seen the screenshots. But I can't stress this enough. The combat is some of the best I've experienced in any game like this, despite having a few rough edges. Another thing worthy of praise in this game is the difficulty, and this is getting talked about in a variety of ways. I can see hardcore Souls fans just not really thinking it's that difficult. They may even want a hard mode. I actually find normal to be just the right temperature. If I get too relaxed or I make a lot of mistakes, the punishment for that feels very fair. You get taken to task if you get sloppy. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I'm not a fan of in the bad section, just some things that I think could still use some polish. But overall, I like the lane that this game is falling into. Similar to how Rise of the Ronin felt like a blend of Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro, but it wasn't really either game. It wasn't as hard as Sekiro, but it certainly wasn't as approachable or casual as Ghost of Tsushima. This game, I think Stellar Blade, sort of lands in between Final Fantasy XVI and Sekiro. It certainly is not nearly as hard as Sekiro, but it is also not as approachable or breezy as the combat felt in Final Fantasy Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16's combat is amazing, and there's so much depth and complexity to it, but it's pretty straightforward, and I would describe it as fairly easy. You can make it even easier with some of the things that you can put on your character. But Sekiro, we know, is very, very down to timing and rhythm. And there are fights in Stellar Blade that are like that, but they still don't seem quite as difficult. I actually haven't really failed very many boss fights, and even footage that I might be using right now in this video, even though I did die, I was able to come back with one of those hearts, and I was able to beat the boss on my first try. So sometimes my boss fight footage might look a little rough around the edges because it's my first time fighting them, and I found myself able to beat most of the bosses on my first try. Now again, I'm only 10 hours into the game, so I'm sure there'll be some that put me back on my heels quite a bit, but I did not have that experience in Sekiro. Some of the earliest bosses in that game beat me many times before I finally achieved victory. Now, I personally like that games are landing in what I'm describing as this center lane. I don't always want to sweat through a play session, but I also would like to play and be regularly challenged, so I don't feel like I'm just sort of crushing a game and cruising through it with ease. So I would encourage players to push through and keep this game on normal. I do know some of those early areas are going to bum you out. It can get a little overwhelming, especially group fights. I think that's probably one of the worst experiences in this game is the group fighting. I think one-on-one's a lot more enjoyable, but don't let that bum you out. If you can master the blocking and the parrying, I do think it will be worth it to play this game on the normal difficulty. Alright, so what are the bad things in this game? Actually, there's not a lot that I would call bad, but a theme emerged from the reviews as I was reading through them during my review roundup. And the recurring things that came up were bland story and characters, side questing, and platforming. Now, before I get to those issues, I do want to say some things about combat, because my only real gripe with combat is that there still seems to be times where inputs are dropped. Albeit, once I was not playing through my capture card, it did decrease quite a bit. So I'm not sure what's happening there. I don't know if my capture card's doing something where periodically I'm not seeing what's happening at the right time, so it makes it feel like I'm dropping an input. Once I moved to my television, it still happens, but it doesn't happen very often. I'm not sure what the cause is. I know they tried to address this with the day one patch. There are still people complaining about some semblance of latency or something. I'm not sure if this is going to be TV dependent, as I said, once I wasn't on my capture card, it seems to go away for the most part, but it does seem to happen from time to time. So this could be TV related. It could be the latency or the refresh rate of the device that you're watching through that is affecting that. Also, I actually die less to bosses in this game. I die more to group fights where you just get spammed and stun locked, and I think this is one thing that is going to cause people in those early areas to maybe just turn the difficulty down. They're not going to understand that if you can really kite enemies away from the group or get one or two of them at a time, it goes so much more smoothly. One particular fight, there's these butcher-looking enemies in the wildlands. There was literally nothing I could do. Their attacks were just coming in such succession, and they're attacking through each other. When enemies don't have impact on each other, I always find that to be a little annoying. It's like they're able to just sort of attack through each other, but use that to your advantage. If you get people grouped up on you, there is that one beta attack where you kind of swing the sword in a big circular motion and you can take them all out at once. That tends to help. And don't forget to use those grenades that can kind of help, manage those group fights and do good crowd control. Now, that's not really a gripe. This is more of a warning that the group fighting in this game is where things can kind of fall apart. It's not necessarily that it's bad. It just feels like some of the rough edges of the combat, not as finessed or as fun, because the boss fights truly are where this game's combat shines. Now, the story and the side questing and the platforming, okay? I don't have any major issues with the story or the characters. I am playing it with the Korean voice actors, so I think it's less noticeable if some of the lines are falling flat. I was watching footage of some other people play, and I thought, oh yeah, I could kind of see why people feel like the story and the characters are a little bit dull. But something that is sort of tangentially related to this with the side questing, and I may be in a unique position on this, but when I play side quests in games like this, I generally don't get invested in the random NPCs in town who need me to go find Billy who fell down the well, okay? I enjoy clearing side quests off of the map and from my queue, but I prefer to have the interaction with those NPCs be quite brief. And this is where Rise of the Ronin really spoiled me, because you could just hit a button and skip right through all of the dialogue for the side quests in Ronin, and there were a lot of them. So that was very helpful helpful in me clearing out side quests and moving through Ronin rather expeditiously. Now, the devs behind Stellar Blade, they may just need to learn some basic quest design standards, like don't make players listen to everything if they don't want to, especially if it is just a side quest. I know Tsushima did this, but Tsushima I feel like did a better job of, like, you just sort of ride along with the character or head to the quest a lot of the times and just listen to the dialogue. Standing and having to listen to an NPC go into great detail about why I need to go look for something in the desert is probably great for the players who want all of the extra detail, but I don't want all that extra detail. I don't feel like it really adds to the story all that much. I'm just doing the quest as sort of a means of clearing the map and getting XP. That's why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it because I'm investing in this random character on a street corner. So this isn't a major complaint. It just feels like a rough edge that may motivate some players to avoid those side quests. I just find it hard to connect with non-main characters who get super chatty and then they just fade into the background once the quest is finished. Now, on the topic of side quests, I did not fully agree with those who said that the side quests weren't enjoyable because they had you sort of revisiting certain areas. I grabbed all the side quests, I stacked them up in the desert area, and it felt very satisfying. Just comb over the map, click on the icons, and go and get them done. However, when I had to return to Eidos 7, that was when I felt the problem. It wasn't because I was returning into an old area. I don't think that was the issue. I liked being back there. I liked being able to, oh, I missed this, or, oh, I didn't know I could climb this. You're paying a little bit more attention now that you're sort of revisiting a familiar area and you're stronger, right? You're clearing out the enemies a little bit faster. The real issue was that I had no map and there was no expedient way to get where I wanted to go. I also then, because I didn't have a map, I didn't know if I was going the right way or if I had missed it. In the open area of the Wildlands, it was very easy to toggle a side quest. You could fast travel or you could just run where you needed to be. She runs rather quickly and the areas are not that large. But areas like Eidos 7, they're not conducive to the revisiting mechanic. The lack of a map had me spending a good bit of time just wandering around saying to myself, like, is this where I'm supposed to go? Did I miss the thing I was supposed to do? On the topic of platforming, this is going to touch on this because when you're going into these areas, you are having to do a bit of platforming. So I don't think the revisiting is the problem. I think it's that you're not equipping the player to know if they're heading in the right direction, because I stumbled upon the one area. I thought I had missed it and I just took the train to the next area, and then all of a sudden Eve started talking. I was like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. So, platforming. It's not that it's bad, okay? It's that it's not very good for how often you have to do it. Now, this will be a great segue into my final section about the game sort of being eclectic, but for the sake of brevity, I will just say this. I like exploring, and I like finding secrets, and I like that you're rewarded for that in this game. But the tedium of climbing and consistently getting into an area where you find out a door is locked or something requires power, it can start to pull away from the good parts of the game. And I do think that might be something that dissuades people from even doing side quests or exploring, because it doesn't feel like it's great. Again, the platforming isn't bad. It just doesn't shine as strongly as it should, since it does eat up so much time. The combat's wonderful. Like, every time you get into a combat sequence, it's almost refreshing if you've been doing a lot of climbing and jumping. Okay, now this is a great time to talk about the eclectic nature of Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade is a game that seems to want to be a lot of things. And now, if my editor can go grab footage from the Dead Space-like area, you're going to see what I mean. We tend to avoid that because it ends up putting, like, my other camera on screen, but it really does, I think, capture what I'm trying to talk about. Because the truth is, it was a really great area. I had a few decent jump scares, there's a wonderful tone, and another, I think, display of how the devs really did great work with the environments and just the scope and the design. They felt big, they felt sort of creepy and foreboding. Great use of lighting as well. Even the boss fight in this area was fun and unique because you can't use your sword. You're literally just using your gun. It felt very much like Dead Space when you're moving through the halls and trying to get through the corridors, and then all of a sudden you're fighting this boss. But in the first 10 hours of Stellar Blade, I feel like I played maybe 3 or 4 different types of games, and I actually like that. but some players may not. The demo certainly made it feel like it would lean more heavily into the Sekiro vibes, and the boss fights and the open world combat certainly brings the heat. Not quite as hot as hardcore Souls fans might like, but definitely challenging. However, what might turn players off is the pacing. The opening of the game feels like a very slow, sort of drawn out tutorial, and I actually like that, but it wasn't until I got to Zion and the Wildlands that I really felt like the game sort of opened up. And for some players, that might just be too long. For others, it might feel nice to have variety and a steady change of pace and gameplay. You go from fighting really intense boss fights that can maybe frustrate you or make you fail a bunch, and then all of a sudden you're navigating corridors and sneaking around or just climbing and jumping. I, for one, am enjoying the changes and the many-sidedness of Stellar Blade, but I can definitely understand why others may not. For now, if nothing I have said turns you off from the game, then I cannot recommend this game enough. I'm really enjoying it. I am thoroughly enjoying map clearing, quest clearing, and this is definitely a game that, just like Rise of Ronin, it's got its hooks in me, and I'm going to just want to keep going back and keep completing it. For the combat, for the environments, it's just fun to play as Eve. They did a very good job making your build feel impactful, making the combat feel challenging and rewarding, as well as exploring and clearing that map. But that's just what I think. Now I'd like to hear what you think, and you can do that in a comment below, or you can head over to the live stream. We'll put a card right here on the video. I discuss these videos with my live audience every day, and I'd love to see you there.